here we are. We've arrived. We've gotten past the Chariot, and we're at the number 8 trump, the Strength, or as I see her, the Crone. There are 3 trumps where the goddess spirit energy appears in a reading, or as a major mentor guiding spirit in a personal tarot journey. And what we are on is pretty much that kind of personal, in-depth psychological tarot journey. So the cards where she appears out of the entire 22 cards are 3. The High Priestess, where she appears as the maid, fresh, new, not yet able to understand everything that will be revealed to her. So here she is, the High Priestess. Then she appears again as the Empress, the Mother. And then finally, she makes another appearance here at trump number 8, the Strength. Here we arrive at the Crone phase of the goddess spirit. By now, hopefully, you have learned so many lessons about life, survival, and the world you find yourself in. But these lessons are your first pass through the cycles of learning. In the previous cards, you may have dealt with various issues, mostly emotional or psychological. Whether they were negative or positive depends on your unique responses. But here in the 8th card, Goddess appears, and she's relaxed. She's chilling with a big cat. This is a card of maturity and understanding beginning to rise on the horizon of your mind. You should be feeling more comfortable in your skin by now. The imagery of this card usually depicts a beautiful young nymph playing or petting a huge lion that is tamed and calmly responding to her. It's so much deeper than that imagery of Beauty and the Beast or Eros and Psyche. It's more a process of realization that the beast is always in you. This card's presence reflects calm, persistent, consistent engagement with your inner beast. I want you to really consider this imagery in this card and consider that instead of a very young woman or even a mother, that you see a crone, an aged, wise, older woman. She understands her inner power. But I want you to hold a different image than the one that the word crone might conjure up. I want you to think of a modern crone, the modern older woman, the one who is beautiful, stately, polished, and extremely comfortable in her skin. Welcoming her beautiful gray silver locks, her thickening body, all the lines, all the rows, all of it. She's comfortable there. She's tamed that beast that throws fear at her and tells her, oh my God, no one is going to love you. No one's going to want you. You're old, you're useless, it's over. Your beauty is gone. She tamed that beast. She's at the full moon. There are things that have been completed on her journey. She's shining full bright with her light, all of the light reflected in her from the sun, her polar opposite. That mighty sun can't harm her. She shines back at him. And let's recap real quick. The woman is the full moon, and the cat is the sun. And the energy between them two and their engagement with each other and their responses to each other are eclipses. Eclipses are when sunlight is being blocked by either the moon, which that's a solar eclipse, or the earth, that's a lunar eclipse. The blocking of the sunlight is the struggle with our inner beast, our inner eclipses, when our light is being blocked. And it's an ongoing struggle, which at the 8th trump, goddess energy, wisdom says, it's the way of life. Nothing you can do about it but flow through it. You can prepare by knowing it will occur, because this helps you remain calm. Go within, tap your inner power, which will never, ever run out. You'll never run out of your inner power. Your ability to tap into your inner goddess connection. Take control of your situation, whatever it may be. Ancestors and goddess energy are present and working behind the scenes whenever the strength appears, either in a reading or in your personal tarot journey when you arrive at the strength. They're all working on your behalf to make sure that you stay on track and fulfill the purpose that you came into this life to fulfill. Your being calm helps everyone else be encouraged around you. That's why you're the crone here. You're modeling behavior. In the middle of a frenzy of activity, you remain calm. You're in control. So here's your call. Go within, pull on your strength, calm your inner beast, and carry on.
This is Tarot Stories with Marilia and Desiree, presenting the 8th card of the Major Arcana, Strength. The Strength card shows a mature woman calmly engaging with a lion. On the Worth deck, her eyes are closed and her hands are opening the lion's mouth. Above her head is the infinity symbol and a crown. We have seen this symbol before on the Magician's head, the official first card of the Major Arcana. That is because the tools at the Magician's disposal are infinitely available. Though they come both from the realm of the spirit and the material world, what they provide will always be available to you. On the Strength card, the same is true. But what is infinitely available to you in this card is your connection to the beast within and the beast without, for there is no real distinction between the two. The beast and the woman represent instinct and intuition. Intuition lives seemingly in the brain, while instinct is a reaction to external forces. Instincts are involuntary. For example, a baby will suck if you rub their cheek, and I will scream if I encounter a roach. Intuition is experienced as a gut feeling, but will ruminate in your mind before any action is taken. When we are hungry, this is an instinct, but if we reject food that looks delicious but smells a little off, we are using our intuition. The learned experiences of eating rotten food and getting sick tells us not to take the risk, even though our instinct tells us we need to eat. The Crone of the Strength card has mastered this balance and has at her infinite disposal the power of her inner wisdom. She is strong of mind and is unable to be tricked or manipulated, even by the voices in her head. She is, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes puts it in Women Who Run with Wolves, having rhythms that are uninterrupted by overdoses of the intellect. Which brings us to why the image is a woman and not a man. This is a card of the feminine principle of wisdom rather than the masculine principle of knowledge. This also explains why I described her as a crone. Wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes with age. But make no mistake, this is a card very relevant to men, particularly because men who do not menstruate do not have a constant reminder of this connection to the rhythms of nature. But though menstruation is obvious, it is not the only human condition tying us to the cycles of nature. Our entire endocrine system is tied to the cycles of nature. Hormone production relies on a relationship with the outside world. The cycles of the sun dictate testosterone levels. Basically, the more sunlight, the greater the testosterone production. Sunlight regulates the melatonin in our bodies, which in turn keeps us from developing deficiencies in testosterone and other hormones, such as cortisol, the stress hormone. And this brings me to anxiety. Try for a moment to think of the differences between your reaction to the image on the tarot card and what a very distant ancestor might experience. How much more anxiety would they have felt looking at an image like this? We no longer fear wild, powerful beasts. We have dominated them for so long, pushing them out of their habitats and transforming their previous ecosystems into sterile concrete fortresses. Now the wild beasts stay in their place, pinned in by railways, roads, buildings, and fences. We know they're out there somewhere, but mostly we do not fear them. If instead you could represent an equivalent modern anxiety, what would that image look like? What happens to our bodies when we feel anxious? We tense up, become hyper alert, hyper aware. We are anticipating something and we're terrified. The response is called fight or flight because when we used to be immersed in our ecosystems and in tune with the natural cycles of life, those would have been the appropriate response when coming to face with a dangerous wild beast. But today, when we hear fight or flight, the fight option is different. The fight option has become paralysis. There is nothing to physically fight and nowhere to run. Lashing out, lamenting, emoting in any way in response to our modern anxieties is dramatic, uncomfortable, and even crazy. We must keep calm and carry on. The anxieties our ancestors would have faced forced them to adapt. They would have plenty of exercise and access to nature. We don't really adapt. Instead, we suppress and ignore, then settle for an artificial cure. For us, anxieties are thoughts on constant fire in our heads. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if they don't like me? What if the plane falls out of the sky? What if I can't pay my bills? Am I doing enough? The fear is real, the anxiety is real, but the outcome is very different. These thoughts do not usually help us adapt in any way. If you ask yourself if you're doing enough and as a result start to do more, you may only be causing yourself greater problems. Likewise, if while you're on a plane, you're constantly thinking of it falling out of the sky, this does not in fact keep the airplane suspended. Asking yourself if others will like you will only result in making you a people pleaser, which is why the Strength card will come up after you or someone close to you has experienced emotional or physical trauma or even death. It is these lived experiences which sharpen our instincts and turn up the volume on our intuition, just as it did for our ancestors long ago. Though we do not want to put ourselves in harm's way, we have to take risks in order to develop inner wisdom. We have a desire to become powerful in our inner wisdom, but we must suffer a great deal in order to achieve this. To let the beast out is to become scratched and clawed and bitten. You may find that you are not valued by Western society, who can no longer manipulate, control, and sell you anything. You are not easily frightened into submission. You are in complete control of your choices. Like the crazy cat lady, now cheerfully embraced by all humans, young, old, and all genders. But she used to be a woman who had nothing left to prove. Lonely, unmarried, unwanted, childless, with only her cats to care for. She was the modern-day witch, living on the outskirts of society, not glamorous or trendy or charming or friendly. She loved her goddamn cats because they didn't judge her, and their needs were simple, and she could sit in her chair and knit or read, and everyone would stay the fuck away because they have allergies. But I would take a moment to really think about what life was like for her before social media was taken over by these adorable bite-sized predators. She had to completely give up her connection with other humans in order to be connected to nature. Thankfully, it is easier now. We have become more accepting of those who live outside of society and willing to know what they know. And a really magical thing happens when we become friends with the beast. We begin to trust our instincts, rely on our intuition, and the more we do, the stronger they get. In Eastern European myth, Vasilisa and Baba Yaga are the strength card. Vasilisa's life started out ideal. She was the kind and beautiful daughter of a merchant and his wife. Vasilisa learned so much from her mother. As they went about their daily household chores, Vasilisa's mom always found a way to make even the most tedious and mundane tasks enjoyable. And she always had an ingenious way of sneaking in a lesson, teaching Vasilisa herb remedies using songs and poems. Their home was always filled with laughter, singing, dancing, and play. One evening, Vasilisa noticed that instead of doing her usual mending, her mother was busy making a curious-looking little rag doll from the scraps of material and some corn husks she had left over. She watched as her mother stuffed the doll and wrapped thread around it in sections so that there was a head and a waist from which the leftover material formed a long, fluffy skirt. She had just enough material left to give the doll a neat little headscarf, and then, forming a little bundle out of the rest, she tied a small piece of ribbon around it and fastened it to the doll's waist, so that the doll was now holding a little baby. Then Vasilisa noticed something else. Her mother was not singing or humming a melody as she normally did when she sat in her rocker with her needle and thread. Her lips were moving, but Vasilisa couldn't make out what the words were. There was something strange about the whole thing, but Vasilisa was too enchanted to say a word. She just wanted to sit there watching her mother forever. When the doll was complete, she handed it to Vasilisa and said, "Vasilisa, now I will teach you something my mother taught me. You must protect this doll. You must feed it and care for it. If you do, there will never be an obstacle you cannot overcome." The girl looked down at the doll. Though she didn't see anything particularly magical about it, she loved it just the same. And from then on, she did exactly as her mother said. Any time she had a meal, she reserved some of her portion for the doll. After that night, Vasilisa's mother began to fade. Her round, plump face and rosy red cheeks quickly became sunken and grayish. Vasilisa knew her mother would not be with her for long. Her heart ached as she busied herself completing all the household chores on her own, humming and singing as always, but it was a different melody. She didn't mind the extra workload. It kept her busy so that she didn't have to think. Thinking brought too much sorrow. One morning she woke to find her mother was gone. Strangely, life went on around her, though she thought it should have stopped. Her father seemed to adopt the same grieving method as she had, busying himself with work. He knew he would have to leave soon to conduct business in the city so many miles away. And at just 8 years old, Vasilisa could manage all the household chores, but she was too young to be at home alone for so long. Soon he thought, I will have to find her a mother. He knew no one could be the mother to Vasilisa that his wife had been, but he thought, maybe if I find a widow with children of her own, at the very least, Vasilisa would not be alone. This wasn't hard to do. In this time, life was hard, and villages were full of widows looking to improve their situation. Vasilisa's dad was handsome and made a good living. So before long, Vasilisa had a new mother and 2 new sisters. This was almost too much for Vasilisa, who took to carrying the doll in her pocket now constantly. She didn't know what to think or feel. She was angry one minute, but the next she felt guilty. She didn't want to make things harder for her father, but she was in so much pain. And when she finally thought about it, I guess it wasn't that bad. Her stepmother was plain, but also kind of pretty, and her stepsisters were 8 and 10, very close to her same age. Maybe she could teach them the games she used to play with her mom. Maybe they would sing and laugh and play with her as they completed their daily chores. But as Vasilisa grew into a young woman, things began to change. Vasilisa was getting attention from boys. In fact, there wasn't a worthwhile suitor in the village who wasn't holding out for a chance to court Vasilisa. Vasilisa had continued to keep herself busy with household responsibilities to keep the persistent heartache at bay. At night, she would quietly lament to the doll. As she swept the floors, cooked the meals, tended the hearth, fed the chickens, milked the cows, she sang into the wind with her doll in her pocket and her mother's spirit at her side. She closed her eyes and twirled, imagining her mother's soft hands holding tightly onto hers. And though her stepsister were not mean, they were also not as helpful as she had imagined. In fact, they never helped her at all. Her stepmother continuously offered excuses for them, and she would point to Vasilisa's beauty, accusing her of trying to make her daughters fade from prolonged exposure to the sun. Never mind that Vasilisa spent every second she could working outdoors while growing more and more beautiful, either in spite or because of it. Like a flower, the sun seemed to shine just for her, and the boys couldn't help but notice. Little did Vasilisa know her stepmother had had enough of it. She saw Vasilisa as a threat to her daughter's future. There were not many suitable families in the village, and Vasilisa's stepmother wasn't going to settle for her stepdaughter's leftovers. So the very next time her father went away for an extended business trip, her stepmother packed up the house and all of their belongings, sold it, and moved them to a village some distance away. A village at the very edge of a dark, tangled forest. Vasilisa thought of her mother's words as she reached into her pocket and wrapped her hand around the little doll. Her new home was dreary, cold and damp and smelling of mildew. She immediately set her mind to improving their conditions, and was met with the usual indifference as her stepmother and sisters set off to do whatever they could to avoid the mess and Vasilisa. When they finally came back, she had made the house feel like a home, but you wouldn't know it by their reaction. Tracking heaps of mud through the freshly scrubbed floor, throwing their coats and scarves off onto the furniture, and demanding that the house was too cold and too dark. "How will you do the spinning in the dark, Vasilisa? Your sisters will be able to see the light of their needles, but there will be no light for you at the spindle." Her stepsisters chimed in, each declaring that since they didn't need the light, Vasilisa should be the one to get it. But from where? Vasilisa asked. The new village had few neighbors, and the houses were separated by miles. Her stepmother looked at her with eyes more cold than ever. "You will go get some from the old lady who lives in the woods, and you should hurry. It's getting late." Vasilisa stared at her for a moment, not sure how to respond. Something in her stepmother's look and tone frightened her, but she couldn't decide if she was more afraid to go into a dark and unfamiliar forest or dare to argue. She reached into her pocket, felt the doll, and without saying a word, without even asking her stepmother for directions, made ready for the journey and stepped outside. It was bitter cold, and the late afternoon sun had already started its descent into the horizon, but she held tightly to her doll, and her feet began to move, one and then the other. As she reached the forest, she stopped. It looked as if the enormous hulking trees and web of vines and foliage would swallow her whole if she went any further, but another force pushed her on. It felt as if the doll was telling her to keep moving. When she would reach a fork in the path, the doll would tell her which way to go. She walked deeper and deeper into the forest, weaving her way through the narrow paths obstructed by fallen trees and thick, overgrown brush. She could no longer see the sky to try to make out the time, but she felt as though she had been walking not for hours, but for days. Suddenly, a horseman clad in white rode past her, and with him the sense that day had passed. Not long after, another horseman passed, but was covered in red. Even his horse was red. Finally, she spotted light just past the trees. She began to quicken her pace, beating back twigs and tearing at vines. But when she finally reached a clearing, her heart sank low in her chest. She had never been so terrified in her life. There was a fence made of human spines. At the top of each was a skull, and out of the holes where the mouth, eyes, and nose should have been beamed a fiery light. Just then, yet another horseman, this time all in black, rode through the gates into the courtyard and disappeared, while almost simultaneously something round and metal appeared to be flying right towards her. Her heart began to pound so loudly in her chest she thought she just might pass out. But instead she closed her eyes, held onto the doll, and pictured her mother's face saying those words again. Quickly she whispered, "Little doll, please, I need you. Tell me what to do." The doll said, "Don't worry. As long as I am with you, she can't hurt you. Just keep going. You must go in and get the light." Vasilisa approached the house, but before she reached the gate, she noticed yet another horrifying characteristic of this creepy old shack. For a house, it was not. It was turning slowly, and it was standing on legs, chicken legs, and its door was held shut by severed hands. Vasilisa rubbed her eyes. Was she high? Had she picked the wrong mushrooms when she was out foraging this afternoon? This cannot be real. This isn't possible. What did the doll mean? She wouldn't hurt me. Why would a little old lady living alone in the woods want to hurt me? But before any further doubt could cross her mind, the round metal object landed in front of her. It was a cauldron, and inside it, a very, very old woman with a shriveled face, a long, sagging nose that reached down to her chin, and teeth so rotten and decayed they seemed to dangle freely in her mouth. Suddenly, Vasilisa knew exactly who this was. The old witch the boys would talk about, and her stepsisters would tease her about, Baba Yaga, known for luring wanderers into her home to eat them.
"Who are you, and what are you doing near my home? What do you want?"
Shaking and barely able to hear the old woman's words over her pounding heart, Vasilisa said, Good evening. I've been sent by my stepmother. You see, we arrived this morning and are in need of light." Baba Yaga looked her over and then replied,
"Well, your stepmother should know about me, little girl. I don't just give things away, for if I did, I would have nothing. If you want light, you will have to pay for it one way or another. Work for it, or else I will make you my meal."
Vasilisa's eyes darted to the bone fence and back to Baba Yaga. Then she agreed. "What would you like me to do?" asked Vasilisa.
"You must serve my dinner to me tonight. In the morning, when I leave, you will sweep, clean the house, do the washing and mending, then go into the fields, gather the oats, sift them, and bring them back here. All this must be done before I get back."
That night, as she lay on the dirty reed floor in the stranger's house, she took her doll out of her pocket. Though Baba Yaga's dinner was enough for 10 men, she offered none of it to Vasilisa. But as Vasilisa was cleaning up from the meal, she set aside whatever morsels she could. Now she gave these food offerings to her doll, who ate them up. "Vasilisa, I know you worry that you will not be able to complete all of these tasks," the doll said, "but do not worry. Rest now, and you will be wiser in the morning." Vasilisa thought this was a terrible idea. How in the world would she get everything done if she allowed herself to sleep? What if she didn't wake up early enough? But her eyelids became heavy and her breathing slowed, and she could not stop herself from falling fast asleep. She woke up just in time to see Baba Yaga ascend into the sky in her cauldron, her bony fingers gripping the pestle which steered her course in one hand, while the other held a broom which swept away any trace of her path. The girl rubbed her eyes, but quickly realized she wasn't dreaming. She got to work immediately, cleaning the house and preparing dinner, stopping only to gaze out of the window when the white horseman blazed past the hut. Once she was finished, she went out to start the washing, but to her delight, it had already been done. So had the mending, and the oats had been collected and sifted too. The red horseman galloped past. When finally she heard the hoofs of the black horseman pounding the ground and darkness covered the sky, Baba Yaga returned. The light from the skulls lit up so bright, if it were not for the horseman on horseback, it would be difficult to know that it was night. Vasilisa was actually excited for Baba Yaga to see that she had finished all the tasks, but Baba Yaga did not look pleased. Instead, she told Vasilisa she would need her to do a few more things before she would give her the light. Vasilisa reluctantly agreed. That night, as Baba Yaga ate up the dinner Vasilisa prepared, she told her that she should do all the same chores again, but this time she also needed her to clean every strand of her hay. Vasilisa agreed, and Baba Yaga immediately slumped over and fell asleep. Again, Vasilisa saved whatever scraps she could as she cleaned up, and before laying down to rest, offered it to her little doll, thanking her for all her help that day. The doll only smiled and ate up the offerings, then said, once again, "Get some rest now. You will be wiser in the morning." This time she did not fight her sleep. The next day was just the same. Baba Yaga took off in her cauldron, sweeping her path behind her, and the red night rode past the hut. She cleaned, she prepared dinner, and once again, just as the red horseman rode past, went out to do the washing, only to find it was already done, along with the mending, gathering, and sifting of oats, and there lie a sparkling clean stack of fresh hay. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she whispered. That night, as the black horseman passed and Baba Yaga landed in her courtyard, Vasilisa sat patiently wondering what Baba Yaga was going to say this time. Baba Yaga entered the hut and looked around, then went outside and noticed everything had been done just as she had asked. She turned quickly to Vasilisa and said, "Why do you stand there so quiet? Don't you have anything you want to ask?" Vasilisa thought for a moment. "Who are the red, white, and black horsemen that keep riding by?"
Aha! They are dawn, day, and night, and they are my faithful servants. Anything else?"
Baba Yaga asked. Vasilisa wanted to ask about the 3 pairs of severed hand hinges and why they were always following her orders, but instead she shook her head.
Now I have a question for you. I gave you impossible tasks. How did you do it?"
Before Vasilisa could think about her response, the words were already forming on her lips. "I did it with the blessing of my mother and her mother before her." Baba Yaga's eyes grew wide.
"Get out. Leave now. There are no blessings in this hut. Go, 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 go. Take the skull on your way out and use it as a lantern, but go and never, 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 never come back."
The black horseman galloped past, and Vasilisa hurried past the gate, squeezing her eyes shut as she plucked a skull from its spine post and went dashing into the dark forest. Running for what felt like forever, and once again watching the white and red horsemen gallop past her, she held the skull with one hand and held the doll with the other. Finally, she reached the clearing before her house just as the black horseman rode past and disappeared into the forest. She realized that she had run the entire way and was completely covered in scratches. Blood was trickling down her legs. She continued to her house, seeing that there was still no light in any of the windows. She burst through her door, looking a literal bloody mess, and immediately her stepmother and sister began to complain about how long it had taken her and how they had to borrow light from a neighbor far off, but they couldn't keep the hearth or the candles lit. Then suddenly they noticed the peculiar lantern Vasilisa was holding. As moths to a flame, they fluttered closer and closer, staring unblinkingly into the blazing eyes of the skeleton. They seemed to be entranced, unable to unlock their gaze. Then, to Vasilisa's utter horror, their eyes began to bleed and smoke, and then burst into flames. At night, they were tormented, unable to shake the penetrating gaze of the skeleton, and by morning, they were burnt to cinders. All that was left was for Vasilisa to pack her belongings and head back home. But before doing so, she planted the skull in the garden, and as she left the following morning, she saw that the roses had overtaken the garden. From then on, her fortune only improved. She never failed to nourish and listen to the little doll, and the doll never failed her. We are all like Vasilisa and her doll. A powerful intuition is available to all of us, but it first must be nurtured and trusted before it can reach its potential. This is our connection to our ancestors, whether we know them or not. We all hold the wisdom of our ancestors. Intuition will keep us moving forward when we are afraid, because it has the power to override our instincts and even our intellect. Vasilisa's instinct stops her at the edge of the forest, while her intuition repels her forward. Remembering what she was told about Baba Yaga is her intellect kicking in. It stops her again, but again, her intuition drives her forward. Baba Yaga is a devourer. She eats enough for 10 men, and she lures and traps unsuspecting victims. But she does not devour Vasilisa. Baba Yaga is nature, who will devour you if you step into her realm without first being initiated. Her and her hut are both the depths of the forest and the depths of the soul, and it is here that we must do the work to strengthen our inner knowing. May the spirits of all our kin guide you to Baba Yaga's hut so that you can overcome your fears and realize your potential. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to hear the conversation episode where we unpack all of the archetypal symbols and characters both in the myth and the card, consider becoming a Patreon. It's just $5 a month and you'll get access to all our bonus material. If you loved that episode, don't forget to give us a 5-star review, especially on Apple and iTunes, but your encouragement is appreciated on any platform. We would really love to know what you think, and we might even feature your review on a future episode. Subscribe so you don't forget to join us next time for The Hermit. Until then, this is Tarot Stories with Marilia and Desiree.